Hey friends, I've been making these cork wreaths for my friends and family members during the holidays for the last 5 years by saving and stashing away corks throughout the year. I've learned a couple things throughout the years of making these, and I want to show you some of the tips and tricks that I've learned and things that might be helpful for you to learn how to make your own cork wreaths. The best part, you only need a few simple materials, and you can also drink wine while making one of these cork wreaths. Let's get started. As for materials, I like using a 14-inch hay wreath, which you can pick up at any local craft store. The reason for the 14 inches, the diameter in the center will start to get a lot smaller once you start to add the corks. When it comes to hanging the wreath, I like to use a thin cotton rope, which I'll tie onto one end, leave a little slack, and then tie off to the other end. I'll show you this in just a sec. Over the years, I've experimented with different ways of attaching the corks to the wreath. I used to use toothpicks. I've even used the push pins without the plastic tops. This year I'm going to experiment with using the plastic tips on the end, which will hopefully save my fingers a little bit of pain. Once the pin is in, I add a little glue and then I push it into the wreath, hold it for a few seconds, and voila! Having half the pin in the cork and the other half in the wreath acts as like a jointery, which keeps the cork more sturdy and stable in the wreath rather than just gluing the cork to the wreath. You will also need a lot of glue. And of course, corks. That's not going to be enough corks. I'm talking a lot of corks. Now that we've gone over the materials, let's get down to business. Here we go! All right, let's get started. Pour yourself a glass of your favorite wine, and we're gonna begin with the hanger. I like to tie one end off, give myself a little slack, and then cut the excess. Once that's done, I'll tie it off and leave just a little bit of slack in there. You don't want it to pull past the wreath. You wanna not be able to see the actual hanger because the corks are gonna cover that up. Then I'll add just a little bit of hot glue, and I mean a little bit, and then I'll roll the rope back over the glue, which will give you a little bit of security at that point. All right, clean up the workspace. Let's get a sip of wine, and it's time. Let's do this. Here we go. I like to start out by prepping as many corks as I can with push pins on one side. With this design, I'm gonna start with the outside of the wreath and work my way inward. When gluing down the first row, I try and keep the wreath as flat as possible, giving myself a flat base for the back, which will be sitting against the wall. I try and keep each row as tight as possible when gluing the corks to the wreath. Each cork is a little bit different in size and length, so it does vary a little bit and there is just a little bit of play that has to happen. I do look at each cork carefully before choosing which side will face down towards the wreath and which side will face out. I then push the pin in the side that will go down into the wreath and continue this process over and over again. About this time is probably a good time to find a nice audiobook or podcast to keep yourself entertained. Once you're in about that second to last ring, it starts to get a little tight, so I like to flip it over and work from the back side. Now that we've finished this style, let me show you how we're going to do this style. With this design, we're going to start from the inside and work our way out, starting with a nice angle, almost a 45-degree angle, and pushing them in. There will be some gaps in between, but the angle is really the important part, and continuing that angle along the way, and just building upon that and building upon that. This one definitely takes a lot more corks than you would think. But keeping that angle and that 45 degree, you'll start to really see it blossom. Because I started on the inside, the flat part is now on the inside of the wreath. And I will have to flip it over to really fill in some of those voids to keep that 45 degree angle in. Once I'm finished, I like to come back and do a little touch up by using tweezers to pull out any of those loose glue strings that are left behind. It's a little easier with tweezers than to try to do it with your fingers. Now, this is something I haven't ever done before, but this year I really think took it up a notch. The backs of them really needed something extra to keep that hay at bay. I found this thin foam sheet at Joann's and figured if I cut it down, I could make a nice backer. I used a few mixing bowls out of the kitchen to find the right diameter of the wreath and then used that as a template to trace it out. I then cut the template out, which was quite easy because the foam was really thin. And then I found another mixing bowl for the inner diameter, made another template, and did the same process by cutting out the inner circle. It actually worked out that the sheet wasn't big enough to fill the whole back because the section at the top where I needed to cut an extra piece, I was able to hide the hanger right underneath that area. I made another little template piece, cut it out to fit, made sure everything lined up, and then it was time to glue it all down. This was the first time doing this type of a backer. I wasn't sure how it was going to work out, so I just did a very thin bead of glue just in case if I needed to remove it for any particular reason. But it actually ended up working out just perfectly and nicely holds that hay kind of at bay and keeps it from making such a mess. And I liked how this little small piece really just finished it off and kept the hanger piece nice and tucked in there. I'm really happy with how these turned out, and I'm really glad that I added this extra foam back piece because I think that just really took it up a notch this year. The design possibilities are endless with making cork wreaths. I hope I inspired you to do something fun with your corks this year. Now grab a snack, pour yourself a glass of wine, and get crafty, my friends.